I'm Kyle Malnati, your host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. At Calibrate, we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. My personal mission is to encourage, empower, and educate you by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. Our esteemed guest today, a gentleman by the name of Dave Dubeau. Dave is an entrepreneur. He's a real estate enthusiast. He's someone that raises capital, dare I say, syndicates deals. Dave is an expert in gathering people together that were used to kind of doing this mom and pop investing on their own, and all of a sudden being able to curate capital from passive investors. Dave, I'm excited to have this conversation with you today. Welcome to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast.
Thank you very much, Kyle. It's a pleasure. Appreciate it.
So I'm holding in your hands an ebook that I think is a great resource, and we're going to go ahead and plug that right away. It's called the Money Partner Formula. You can get a copy of that by going to investorattractionbook.com. Dave, this book, I read through the first two chapters, and I was immediately attracted to it because I spend a lot of time in my day-to-day business as an apartment broker. Right. I sell anywhere between 5-unit and 50-unit apartment buildings here in Denver, Colorado, and really enjoy that process of working with mom and pop investors, typically local investors that are investing for their own families. And in fact, what you probably haven't heard, but is in the intro to our show, is that our mission at Calibrate Real Estate is that we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. And I believe that that's probably very much tied into why you like to work in real estate syndications and helping people learn how to raise money. I've got to ask though, and it wasn't super apparent right when I first started reading the book, why did you even start this concept of real estate syndications and having a heart as a teacher to teach people how to do this business? Where does that come from?
Well, it comes from personal failure and massive personal pain. So, Kyle, I've been in and around real estate investing for quite some time now, since about 2001. When I first started doing real estate investing seriously, I had been living overseas for a long time, came back home to Canada, which is where I live, and had to figure out what am I going to do, right? Because what I was doing before wasn't going to work where I was living. I had been gone so long, didn't have bad credit. I had zero credit. I've been self-employed a long time, pretty much unemployable. I had to figure out what am I going to do to feed the family kind of thing. So I saw one of those, do you remember those late night infomercials?
Yeah, I do.
You too can get rich in real estate with little or no money down. I said, that's perfect because that's what I got. So I set away for this course and put it into play. And my first kind of kick of the can was doing 18 deals in 18 months, all around kind of the creative space. So, doing options and doing sandwich leases and doing all these kind of wild and wonky things with desperate property sellers. Did that for a while. That was cool. Took some time off from real estate investing. When I got back in, I got into more of a traditional kind of style where I actually had to come up with down payments and qualify and buy properties that way. So like a lot of folks, I was able to self-finance my first couple of deals, and then I ran out of cash, ran out of credit, hit the wall. And of course, that's when the quote unquote perfect deal fell in my lap, right? And I don't know if have you ever heard this term, Carl? Find the deal and the money will find you. Have you ever heard that one?
Yes, I have heard that one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I heard that one too. And I said, well, that sounds good, but I think I still need to do something. So I'd also heard, you know what, if you need to raise money, the fastest way is to pick up the phone and start dialing for dollars, or cold calling is another term for that. So to be perfectly frank, I didn't come from a sales background. I'd never done that before. But I thought I'll give it a try. So I picked up the phone, started calling people, called, rejected. And quite frankly, I'd like to be able to say I made hundreds of calls and just kind of grinded my way through it, but I didn't. I made about 8 or 9 calls, got rejected every time, put on a big pouty face and quit. That's just being frank. So I decided, okay, cold calling, that's not for me. I also heard, get out there and network up a storm. Go out there and turn every conversation into a real estate conversation. Now, believe it or not, because we're doing this podcast, but I'm not a natural extrovert. I'm kind of introverted. So again, out of my comfort zone, but I thought I'll give it a try. So I practiced my little elevator pitch, my 30-second commercial, got my stack of business cards, ran down to the local BNI, Chamber of Commerce meetings, Toastmasters, pretty much anywhere where they would let me in the door, I went and schmoozed up a storm the best I could and raised absolutely zero capital. So by this time, I'm definitely running out of time. Right? You got to, this was a single family home, wasn't a big deal, but I had to get an extension on that. And then I came up with what I thought was a brainchild. I said, hey, sorry, I laugh because it's so stupid, but I thought if enough people just could see this deal, it will sell itself. Have you ever heard anybody say something stupid
Yes.
like that before?
I've
Yeah.
said it myself before.
Okay, well, that was the way I said it. It didn't work for me. Hopefully, it's worked for you. But bottom line was, I put together, this is a while ago, I put together a PDF of how great this deal was, and I sent it out to a couple of hundred people that I knew. And this was the only thing that I started seeing some response from. I got all these emails back and Kyle went, oh, this is awesome. I'm so excited. Until I started opening up the emails. And basically they're saying stuff like, hey, Dave, haven't heard from you in 5 years. One guy hadn't heard from me in 18 years. And here you are hitting me up for cash for a deal. Take a hike or some version thereof. Bottom line, Kyle, lost that deal. I live in a fairly small community, about 80,000 people at that time. So I definitely ticked off the property seller, ticked off the client that I was working with. We're going to be doing a rent-own deal on this. Ticked off the realtor, ticked off the mortgage broker, got major egg on my face in my local community. And that's when I said, you know what? This was dumb. The way I was trying to do this was dumb. I got to figure out a better way to go about this raising capital thing. So I took courses, read books, took coaching, all this kind of stuff. Most of it was kind of a rehash of the same thing. Like, get better at dialing for dollars, get better at schmoozing, all this kind of stuff. I said, I don't really want to do it that way. So I knew quite a bit about marketing from my previous life experiences and whatnot. I said, why don't I apply marketing to attracting investors and raising capital so that instead of chasing after people, I'm getting people to reach out to me, ideally pre-educated, pre-motivated, predisposed, and pre-qualified to investing, and then having that conversation. So it took a while, but I dialed in the process, and that's what that book's all about, the Money Partner Formula, this 5-step process for attracting investors and raising capital.
Well, and I'm glad that you worked through the process of kind of distilling and figuring out how to approach people the right way and do a lot of that where they come prepared, frankly, and pre-informed that, that when you're talking to them, you're not starting from the very first conversation. It's not a ground floor conversation. They've done some research. They know you. And as you mentioned in your book, and I've had this happen as a podcast host, but then also just I curate my own email list for my own deals that we list and sell within our company as a commission-based real estate agent. People feel like they know you when you communicate correctly through email and through podcasts, through webinars, through YouTube. So we're going to talk to our Calibrate Calvin, our Calibrate Callie, the audience that is a realtor. But we're also going to speak to a lot of my clients, a lot of people that you would work with as well, Dave, that are having success, maybe owning a few rental properties. They could be houses. They could also be small to mid-size apartment buildings. Mm-hmm. And they feel like they're at this tipping point or this scaling point where they'd love to do bigger deals. They feel like they've got great experience, but what they don't know how to do is how to curate an audience where they can then share kind of this friends and family type of, I'd like to do a deal and I'd like to be the general partner and you be a limited partner. We could figure out the legal structure later. What I think is really important is creating and curating a database, something that you've done. It's something that I've done. And I'm going to dare I say, call it the rule of 200, but your exercise of taking a list of 1,000 to 1,500 people, and you do this with people in your own seminars, your webinars, where you say, kind of take your Rolodex using an old fashioned term, or take your cell phone, a more current term. And most people know about 1,000 people. and start going through there and really picking out the best 200. And so without spoiling things, Dave, how do people figure out the best 200 people to start marketing to? Because really, that's all you need to start creating a positive conversation around syndication or building a database as a real estate agent.
Yeah, definitely. So, Kyle, I'll keep my advice more geared towards the mom and pop investors. Realtors just kind of expand that idea. But bottom line, again, quick caveat here. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a security specialist. I'm a real estate guy up in Canada. And I understand big picture how things work. We've got each province up here has its own securities regulator. You guys have the Securities and Exchange Commission. You have each one has your own state commission as well. So, like you said, make sure you're structured properly when you're actually putting your deal together. But what I'm going to show you right now is how to get the low hanging fruit, how to get the biggest impact, the biggest bang for your buck, the fastest. And it's just like you said, Kyle. It's about focusing on people that you have that pre-existing relationship with, right? Because think about it. When it comes to raising capital, if somebody's going to invest 100,000 with you, chances are they need to know you, they need to like you, and they need to trust you with their money. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And the biggest mistake I see most people make when they were trying to raise capital from the beginning is they think everybody and anybody with a pulse and a checkbook could be their investor, right? Like there's billions of people on planet Earth. I'll take anybody who'll cut me a check. Well, yeah, but no. Two reasons we want to avoid that. Number one is logic. If you're going out to strangers, they don't know you, they don't like you, and they sure as heck do not trust you with their $100,000 or more, right? Does that make sense? So you have to start that relationship from scratch, and that's kind of pushing a big rock uphill. And the second big thing to be concerned about is the Securities and Exchange Commission and your state securities commission, right? So you got to stay on the good side of those guys because everybody wants to stay out of jail. So, so with that in mind, here's my recommendation. Just like you said, Kyle, start with your cell phone, export all of your contacts from your cell phone, get them into an Excel spreadsheet. Next thing is go to your email contacts. Everybody, a lot of us have had the same email address for the last 10, 20 years. Export all of your contacts from your email contacts. Do the same thing with your social media contacts. Don't worry too right yet about filtering or sorting it. Just get them all in one place into a spreadsheet. And then what we do for our clients and what I recommend you guys do a merge, purge, deduplicate, get it kind of cleaned up, tidied up. And then here's the trick, Kyle. Once you've got it tidied up, then you go through, here's my rule of thumb. If I see a name and a face pops into my mind and I like that face, keep them. If I see a name and I've got no clue who that person is, delete, right? So you just quickly go through that. And typically, chances are you might have a couple of thousand people in between all of those, because we've all got quite a few Facebook friends. Hate to burst your bubble, but they aren't all real friends, right? But you got a lot of contacts there. So quickly go through it. If you see a name and a face pops in your mind, keep them. If it doesn't, delete them. Or if that face that pops into your mind makes you want to give it a good smack, delete that one too.
Love it. It's great advice, because that is such a, I read that, and then now hearing you say it again is such a clarifying way of saying, let's stop trying to force something that isn't probably a natural relationship that's going to happen. So just be thinking of the people that like, and trust, and inherently they probably know, like, and trust you. And that idea of picturing their face, and if you can't picture it, or if you picture it and you're like, that wasn't a positive experience, get rid of it.
Exactly. Now, here's the thing. Chances are, I mean, all these people, even they're your friends and your family, they know you and they like you. They might not trust you just yet with their $100,000. So, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I think Meatloaf sang a song about that way back in the day, right? 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So we're starting way ahead of the game compared to going out to the great masses, right? We've got 2/3 of the equation already taken care of. Yeah. So that's step number one. Let's create that target group of prospective investors.
And so for those who haven't gotten the book, again, you can go investorattractionbook.com. But for our realtors that are listening, for real estate professionals, this is a great way to curate a client database. If you feel like you are in a spot where you need to calibrate a little bit and get back to some of those great referral sources, this is a fantastic exercise, because a lot of us, if you've had some success, you've got thousands of people you can think of. You may do hundreds of deals a year, hundreds of sides a year, but really kind of distilling it down to those 200 people, I think is a really effective exercise. So I'm going to go through, Dave, real quick, just the step-by-step for those that don't have the book in front of them. Step one was gather, sift, and filter your current contacts. Step two was put your contacts into one place.
Right.
We're going to talk now about where that database needs to live. And there's a bunch of databases out there. Before we go into that subject, update your contact list regularly is step three. Step four, create a top 50 sub list. So let's go back into step two, which is, now that we've gone through that exercise, taken thousands of people down to maybe 200, these are people we can picture in our minds, their face. There's someone that makes us smile. We have a positive recollection of them. Where are we then putting those in that one place? What's the database that you use?
Yeah. So, I mean, the one we use is more designed for investors. It's kind of an in-house program that we have. But, if you're doing this on your own, well, you guys as realtors, you got a gazillion different options. So just use the one that comes with your system. That's fine. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you're a mom and pop investor just getting started, you can just plunk them all into some sort of an email autoresponder system. The one we recommend is called Get Response. There's free trials, there's paid things. Don't go for the free ones because you get what you pay for. So get the paid version. It's only like 15, 20 bucks a month. Get all of your contacts in there. And then here's the beautiful thing. That way we can systematize this and we can start automating some of the outreach, some of the marketing that you're going to be doing. Because if I tell you to write 200 emails and send them out individually, you're not going to do that, right? It might sound good, but it ain't going to happen. So
it's what happened when you started making calls. You make 8 or 10, and you're then either stuck with the correspondence from the first 8 or 10, and that's what ends up happening. And you had shared, and I completely agree, whether Gmail or Hotmail or Yahoo, whatever email system or Microsoft Outlook that you're using, that's not the way to curate this maybe larger database, because you can really only send those emails 1 or 2 at a time, because you'll either one, get caught on a blacklist for spamming. If you send out multiple broadcasts, you'll get flagged, and that's happened. And then you also just don't have the ability of sending one email, and there's the lack of automation. So I agree. There's several different platforms we use in the real estate space. We use MailChimp is what we use to curate all of that. And then we also have a database on the back end of that we feed into MailChimp. So great advice there.
And MailChimp is great. But again, I would highly recommend, because there's a free version and there's a paid version. I would recommend the paid version because your email deliverability is much, much, much higher. So that means that more of the emails that you send will actually get to where they're supposed to be going. Just a quick tip there.
I agree. Any of the things that we utilize for this podcast or for our real estate brokerage, we always opt out of the free version and go into some sort of level of premium. And it's not a lot. It's not, especially if you're realizing just how much you can benefit monetarily from those programs on the back end when you get a deal done. So then your third step is updating your contest list regularly. Now, this is, I think, where a lot of people start to fail. We get a lot of gusto. We have a lot of energy. We're listening to Dave. We're listening to Kyle and saying, we're going to do this the right way. We're not going to do it onesie twosie. We're going to put it into an actual email responder. But the updating part is, I think, where a lot of people fall short. What are some suggestions you have?
When you get out and about and you're meeting people in day-to-day situations and you really make a connection, don't be spammy about this. Don't be MLM-y about this, right? Be genuine around it. If you meet somebody, you have a really good connection with that person, just say, hey, let's say it was you and I, Kyle, I'd say something like this. Hey, Kyle, would you mind if I add you to my email list? About once or twice a month, I'm sending some information out, and it's about what I'm up to with real estate investing. Would you like to be a part of that? And if Kyle says yes, then I make sure that I opt Kyle in to my list. But I always do that with their permission. So that's one way when you're going out and about. Great example of this, way back when, 2003, I met a woman at an event, and she said, Dave, hey, she did that to me. And I said, sure. Promptly forgot all about her. And she added me to her list. And then she phoned me up and reconfirmed a few days later. And then every month, without fail, I got a communication from this lady. When I first met her, this will warm the cockles of your heart, Kyle. She was getting into real estate investing. I think she had one or two condos, little condo units she had purchased. Fast forward 10 years, she had developed a portfolio of over 500 doors, all in the multifamily space. And a huge part of that success was from that constant, consistent communication, just like clockwork. Every single month, her communications were coming out. She built up an investor base and never looked back.
And I resonated with that story. I read it on page 15 of your book. And one of the things that I resonated with is that you met her at a T. Harv Eker seminar. And for those of you that don't know, and I provide recommendations all the time on different books, Secrets of the Millionaire Mind was written by T. Harv Eker back in 2005. And you met her in 03 or 04. And you had shared that she went from being $40,000 in debt to skyrocketing over the course of a decade to having over 500, 600 doors. And what a cool story about how to really curate this audience. And that this is, it's very similar to what I do in my brokerage profession. These tactics are not specific to raising capital. They're not specific to brokerage. It's just how you, frankly, leverage your time and create a database of people that feel like they know you because they are seeing this consistency, and that consistency is really important. I also enjoyed that you shared, a different friend of yours said that your investors invest in you and the property is collateral for their money. Where's that quote come from? Not literally the person, but just kind of having had a lot of experience of coaching people, but then also working on raising capital yourself. That idea that they're investing in you and that the collateral is a different part of it.
Yeah. It all comes back to that trust factor, Kyle. Really, if you think about it, especially when you're working with people that you have that pre-existing relationship with, they already know you, they already like you. Now we're working on that trust factor. When you get that, they really are investing in you. The property itself, well, that's great. The return on investment, that could be great. That's fantastic. But really, at the end of the day, they're investing in the fact that they believe in you. They believe that you know what you're doing. They believe you're going to be taking very good care of them and their money, that you're going to be looking for a really good deal that works out well for you and for them. And here's what I found. I have found that a good investor, even with a mediocre deal, will raise far more capital than a mediocre investor with a really good deal. Okay, just because they've got that trust factor. And it makes sense, right? Would you invest $100,000 in some sort of a shaky kind of a thing that has the potential maybe of creating these really, really good returns? Or would you feel more comfortable investing with somebody who you definitely knows what they're doing, even if the returns are a bit lower, but you're very confident in what they're going to do for you? So that's where that all comes from.
Yeah, I think back to your original comment at the start of our show where you talk about going through the exercise of emailing one-on-one 8 or 10 people, and they're like, you haven't talked to me in 18 years.
Oh, no, I was dumb. I emailed 200 people.
Oh,
I
200.
shot myself in the foot. I ticked off a lot of people, Kyle.
But if you think about it, though, the reason why they say all those things has zero to do with the deal you're talking about. It has everything to do with you. And it's really interesting because most people would think an investor could be more pragmatic and look at things, sort of compartmentalize it and say, I don't really care who the person is that's pitching me the deal. Does the deal make sense? But really one of the major hurdles is making sure that the sponsor of the deal or the person who's going to create this partnership or raise equity or however you're doing it really needs to be trusted, because that's the biggest hurdle to overcome. And it's something for our realtors that are out there that are either thinking of implementing this as a way of supplementing their brokerage income, or they're just trying to calibrate their existing brokerage business. You've got to remember that the most successful people have the ability to demonstrate trust factor and get better at doing it quickly. And the way they do it is by being consistent.
Well, yeah, that's a big part of it. And it's all about how you get started as well. So I was very, very clumsy when I first started trying to raise capital, and just blasting everything out like that was dumb, in retrospect. And at the time, it seemed like a good idea, but we do things very, very differently now. And we get people started on the right foot. So really, once you've got that that target group of prospects, whether they're prospective investors or prospective clients or what have you, what we always recommend is reconnect with them on a personal level first before you start talking business, before you start pitching deals. Like have a genuine reconnection. So we call that a very simple little warm up campaign. It can be as simple as 2 or 3 emails that you send out, just kind of catching people up on what you've been up to for the last 3, 4, 5 years. That's kind of safe, right? If they haven't heard from you in a long time, what the spouse and the kids are up to. If you're married, you got a family, the good stuff that's been going on in your life, the not so good stuff, but keep it really, really personal. I kind of compare this to the old Christmas letters my Aunt Nadine used to write way back in the day before the interweb existed and when long distance calls were like $3 a minute and all this kind of stuff. So people used to write letters. And my Aunt Nadine, once a year, she would write a nice long Christmas letter, photocopy it, and put that in with all her Christmas cards and send that out to all the friends and family. And that's how we stayed in touch. So we do a modern version of that. But here's the trick. At the end of it, don't just tell them what you're up to. At the end of it, say, hey, I send this to you, Kyle. I'd say, hey, well, that's what I've been up to, Kyle. How about you? How are you doing? Please hit reply to this email. Let me know how you're doing. I'd really love to catch up. Send that out and then have a genuine back and forth with the people that get back to you. And again, if you send out 200 of these, don't worry, you're not going to get 200 replies. I wish you would, but you won't. But statistically speaking, you'll get somewhere in the range of 20 to 50 people replying back to you. So just take a little bit of time and have that genuine reconnection, because there's business, there's money, there's capital in those reconnections. But you gotta do that first before you start talking business. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I'm glad you brought up the email warm-up sequence. It's in the book. Again, you can go to investorattractionbook.com right now, get it for free. On page 22, you remind that with your clients, you send out a series of 3 emails over a 10-day period. And you keep the emails short, personal, and friendly, and you literally put a script there of what that looks like. So you've made it simple, and really the only thing someone needs to do is actually just implement it. You had shared with me, and I'm glad you said that just now, you've got that list of 200 people. You might get, if you're lucky, you might get 30, 40, 50 responses. More likely it's 10 or 15. And who cares about the 150 people to 180 people that might not respond? It's the people who do respond that you really want to interact with. The last step after updating your contact list regularly is you create a top 50 sub list. And then that's really kind of that starter list of people that you're going through. What's the importance of going from 200 down to then distilling it down to 50?
Well, actually, that's kind of a little bit more of an advanced tactic there, Kyle. And I would suggest, when you're first getting started, really, really keep it open to the top 200. But once you've done this warm-up campaign, you've started getting some of those replies back, you see, who's responsive, who's not, you might consider creating a more specific group, a subgroup, let's call it that, right, of your top 50 prospects. And for those people, we show them a little extra TLC, right? So what I can recommend there is that you actually start doing some direct mail. So sending them stuff by post, right? Like letters in the mail. Hardly anybody gets those. Hardly anybody does those.
Yeah, it's like a unicorn in your mailbox. You're like, it's not a bill, which are mostly on auto pay anyways. It's not, a leaflet that, the landscaping company is sending to just random people in nice neighborhoods. It's an actual written letter.
Yeah, exactly. And you can automate a lot of this stuff as well too, but it really stands out. See, it gets back to the email. Email, especially when you're using an email autoresponder, your open rate, that's how many people per 100 actually open up your email, typically is pretty low. Like if you're lucky, you're getting 25 to 30%, if you're lucky, right?
Yeah. As a good example, we have about an 18 to 24% open rate
which is very good.
On our average email that we send. And we've got an email database over 8,000 people.
Right. So that's a challenge. So when you're sending out 200 emails, right, you're going to get that kind of percentage open. However, if you send out this kind of direct mail stuff, you get 100% open rate, right? Everybody, especially if you send something kind of lumpy or kind of interesting in the mail, that's going to stick out. That's definitely going to get open. It's going to get read. It's going to get people's attention. So if you want to kick it up a few notches, that's what I highly recommend. Create that subgroup of your top 50. You don't have to do that right away. You can do some of the other stuff first.
All right, so this is great baseline stuff for anybody that is trying to sell anything. We're focusing this on the real estate lens of things, but this is just good, tactical, very practical stuff for building a business. And guess what, everybody? Even if you're in a nonprofit, if you don't bring in more revenue than your expenses, you're out of business. That doesn't matter what you're doing. And business is all about selling something. It can be a very noble thing, but it can also be kind of a slimy, skeezy thing. And that's the reality of life, but we're all in business in some way, shape, or form. And in chapter 2, one of the things I latched onto is, okay, now you've got this stable that I'll use that analogy, the stable of, maybe thoroughbreds in this top 20, top 50, whatever you want to call
Yeah,
it.
you must be in Colorado or someplace like that. I tell you that the horse references.
And what ends up happening is, what do you do with them now? Now you've got these people who are interacting with you and you're having these great conversations. I mean, at some point you need to be able to do a presentation. And I'm going to use myself as the example because I'm embarking on a regular presentation that I've done or been a part of for the past, it's now almost a decade, in different versions of it every other year because of this big event that happens in Denver real estate. And it's all related to, how do we deal with our property tax assessments? That's something that I'm actually embarking upon in the next month. I have a great guest speaker. I've got clients that we have, in years past, before the pandemic, we've had a great client appreciation event tied to it. Cocktails, heavy hors d'oeuvres, great event space. Our top 75 to 100 people are there. It's a big deal. So we're going to be doing this over the web now. And I've learned some things after over 200 podcast episodes of how to curate an audience, how to interview people. But there were some tips that, I was highlighting like crazy as I was looking through how to create a great PowerPoint, how to create a great presentation. And this is just great reminders for anybody that's presenting anything to anyone. So let's go through some of these different things here and why you create a great presentation.
Well, yeah. And again, my niche is definitely for mom and pop real estate investors trying to raise capital, right? And a lot of people just kind of wing it, and they think it's almost like an MLM type thing. They grab the yellow legal pad and the Sharpie and draw some stick figures and a triangle and say, here we are. And I think that's a big mistake because very few people can do that well consistently, Kyle. So especially if you don't have a lot of experience doing presentations or sales presentations or anything like that, a really well organized, well structured, well put together slideshow does wonders. Just simplifies your life so much. It's much more interesting for the other person to look at, and especially these days, you're doing stuff on Zoom, right? You need something visual like that. So that's what I highly recommend, is a good slideshow presentation.
And in your slides, you'd share with us some of the benefits. Is number one, you don't forget your important points. We all get excited. We all get stuck down a rabbit hole. A client asks a question and you don't have something to go back to say, oh yeah, I've got to remember these are the things I want to share to make sure I round out the presentation and don't forget any of these important points. So that's one of the biggest reasons to do this. Obviously, you said it's visually interesting. Step 2. Step 3, it's easy to jump back and forth between different parts of your presentation, which I have seen and appreciated as I've had clients sit in on, maybe we're going to go into the DST world out of investing in apartments. And I've been a part of that several times with clients where they've got a question that really they don't know it, but they're fast forwarding the presentation by 7 slides. And then the presenter wants to naturally go back and say, okay, we missed these 6 slides in the middle. And you go back and forth. So that's another benefit of it. Finally, you're able to modify it and improve it each time you do these presentations. I think that's a hallmark of someone that is a good presenter, is you go back and say, you know what, slide number 7, slide number 8, they're really not in the right spot, or I'm getting people glossed over when I go through that. So I'm going to pitch that and go with something different. And then you can outsource the creation of your PowerPoint presentation and get someone else to clean it up to make it look really professional. So that, I think, is one of the things that people worry about is, I don't have design experience. I don't know how to make things look flashy. I'm using clip art. I'm using Microsoft Word or whatever. So how do you do that with the outsourcing? What are some tips that you've run into as a professional presenter?
Yeah, well, there's a great site out there called Upwork, upwork.com. So you can go on there and you can just basically post the job. Again, you have to come up with the content, right? You can't can't necessarily outsource that. But once you've got the content, you kind of know what order you want it in. You can get somebody else to really make it look professional and pretty by hiring them to create a presentation around them. So upwork.com is what I would recommend.
Now, as you're doing an online presentation, if you want to do a webinar, you give us some great steps. And it was a huge reminder to me. Like I mentioned, I highlighted all over the place. Step one is you invite them to the meeting, suggesting a 1 week out from your meeting, and then you're sending 3 invitation emails. So what does that look like? You've got this presentation, you've got your slides already ready, and then now you're ready to actually send out, here's when we're going to do it. And that's the nerve-wracking part, right? You could spend hours creating a presentation, but once you put that out into the world that we're going to do this, then you're like, it's like inviting someone to a birthday party. Is anybody going to come?
Right. Yeah. Good question. So first thing I would recommend, Kyle, practice your presentation with a live one first before you do a group presentation, right? So whoever your ideal target audience is, try to find one of those people to give you some feedback before you do it in a group presentation. But as far as doing webinars go, man, I've been doing webinars since they used to be called teleseminars, actually. Do you remember those? We used to get together on the phone, nothing visual. It was just like all over the phone. I remember the very first time I did that, Kyle. I was working with a guy. We had 2,000 people registered for a teleseminar. We had 1,000 people on the teleseminar live. It was absolutely huge. And because I was such a cheap wanker at the time, I was trying to reverse engineer how to do this. I was too cheap to spend any money on learning how to do this. I can't remember what we were trying to sell or promote there, but we laid an egg. 1,000 people on the thing live, and whatever it was we were trying to do, we got 0 results. So that's when I decided, okay, that sucks. I better learn how to do this whole teleseminar thing, which then expanded into the webinars. So I think I do about 3 of them a week on average these days. So I'm doing them for a long time. So here's some tips on how to do a really good webinar. Tip number 1, pick the date. I would highly recommend, again, if you're going to kind of following my process, this is one of the last things you do. You don't want to start necessarily with a webinar. This is kind of a build up to a kind of thing. But if you're ready for it, then you pick the date about a month out, get everything set up. A quick and easy way is just do it as a Zoom group meeting. All right. That's probably the easiest thing to do. Just set your Zoom group meeting out a month ahead of time. Make sure you got the paid version of Zoom. Otherwise, it's going to shut off on you automatically after 45 minutes, which would really suck. So make sure you pay the $20 a month or whatever it is for Zoom. And then you need to create some sort of a registration page. That's important, right? So people need to give you their name and their email addresses to get registered for your webinar. So you set all of that up, you got all that ready to go. And then the promotion starts fairly close to the time of the webinar. In fact, let's say we're having the webinar on a Thursday. I would recommend that you start promoting it Monday or Tuesday, and then you send out an email, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Even if your webinar is on the Thursday, send out a promo email on that day. So keep it pretty tight, because again, we're getting so zoomed out these days, you guys. If you give people too much time ahead of time, they're gonna forget all about it. So keep it fairly tight. So that's the promo time there. 3 emails about 3 or 4 days leading up to the webinar itself. And then if you got a good CRM system, it can tell that if somebody registered for the webinar, not to send them any more promo emails about it. That's a good tip there as well. Okay.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because you don't want to whack people with the same thing once they've already registered for it. And then here's the big thing, Cal. You got to remember that just because they registered for it does not mean they're going to show up for it. Right. So for example, when we're working with clients, we're promoting one of their webinars to their list of, let's say, 200 people. They might get 18 to 25 people signed up for the webinar. However, the reality is not everybody's going to show up. That's just the way it works, right? So we need to remind people. So we got 3 promo emails. I suggest you have 3 reminder emails, 1 going out the day before the webinar, just reminding people, giving them the link, that sort of thing. 1, it could be 4 or 5 hours before the webinar, the day of the webinar. And then ideally 1 about 15 minutes before the webinar is going to start, actually. And then again, just remind them, hey, you registered for this. Here's a link, click on this at this time and join me on Zoom. Okay. And then with all of that in mind, Kyle, even if you do a fantastic job, chances are only about half of the people who register for your webinar are actually going to show up for it. So
If that, it could be a third.
it could be a third. Now with these smaller ones, it's typically higher than like a big webinar. Big webinars these days, yeah, you're lucky if you get 25 to 30% actually showing up live. And then you'll hold the webinar, you'll hold the presentation. We use a modified version of the presentation because the normal one we do is really designed for one-on-one type meetings. So do a modified kind of a condensed version. And then remember, at least when it comes to raising capital, the goal of the webinar itself is not to sell a particular deal. The goal of the webinar is to create curiosity and sell people into having a meeting with you. Sell the appointment is what the goal of the webinar is. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And it's something I share with all of my brokers when they're prospecting phone calls. If they're calling someone, whether it's a warm lead, someone that's a friend of a friend, and you're working your sphere of influence, or if it's truly a cold call that you don't know that person, you're not selling anything over the phone. You're selling the opportunity to have a meeting. And the goal is, this is a contact sport. You want to have the contact with people, and then you want to set up the follow-up meeting with them. That's the biggest key. I think people get frustrated when they're like, oh, I didn't sell it. It's like, well, whoever bought a property or gave you $100,000 to invest in a deal over the phone? Very rarely. And if they do, there's something wrong with them. I mean, there's a disconnect for sure.
Well, you had to have all of your ducks in a row ahead of time. You had to have everything set up, and they've already kind of self-identified that when you do have a deal, they want to jump on. That's when that works for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, before we get to the end of our show here, I really resonated, and there's part of me that may felt like we should have just started with this, but this case study about your client Mark, who raised at the very last minute, right as the window was closing, raised enough equity to make a deal happen. I felt like there's probably a lot of people that have been in this situation. He had identified a 14-unit apartment building with 4 commercial units on the bottom floor. The price doesn't matter as much, but it's $1.7 million deal that he was looking at doing. And like you said at the very beginning, he had a great opportunity, but was short on his capital, short on his equity. How did you step in and help him out?
Yeah, so that's exactly what we did. We did what we were talking about here today. We created what I call his $1 million investor presentation, practiced it, got it ready to go. Then we scheduled, in this case, we didn't have a hell of a lot of time. We scheduled a webinar very short out. Now, to Mark's credit, he'd already been doing all the rest of the stuff we've been talking about. He had the target group. He'd been doing a good job with getting top of mind, staying top of mind with the constant, consistent communication, the marketing. So we weren't starting from scratch there. So we promoted this webinar, did just what we said, 3 emails to get people on there. I believe we had, it's been a while now, we had 12 or 14 people on the call live. We recorded it. We promoted the replay to everybody who had opted in to watch the webinar, whether they're on there or not. And again, the whole goal, we did talk about the deal, but we weren't trying to get them to cut a check. It was all, hey, book a call, have a chat with Mark, see if this is a good fit for you. So that's what happened. And within a week, he was able to raise, I believe it was $440,000 to close on that deal. That was huge because he went from single family homes to multifamily in one fell swoop. 6 months later, he found a 24-unit deal. He was able to raise over $1 million for that second deal. That's the one that allowed him to quit the job, become a full-time real estate entrepreneur. So it's all about using other people's money, my friend.
That's the game changer. All right. So Dave Dubeau, rapid fire. Here's our last couple of questions we ask every guest. Are you ready for me?
Hopefully.
All right. So our show is called Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. So is our real estate brokerage firm. For those, a lot of people say recalibrate and kind of get it through that lens. But the word calibrate, the reason I love it is it's a verb. So many companies, so many processes are named after nouns. A verb is all about action, and calibrate is about making adjustments using experimental results to take external factors into account, a lot of trial and error, we wanted to have this happen, we learned this, and we made adjustments. What do you do to calibrate your life on a daily basis?
Yeah, it sounds like the story of my life. What do I do to calibrate on a daily basis? Well, I've kind of developed a routine in the mornings. I know a lot of people have routines, but I like mine. It works for me. And so when I get up, I do a quick little about 11-minute breathing exercise, meditation type process. that helps a lot with getting calibrated personally. I do some push-ups. I do some stretches. I like to read about 10 to 15 pages of some sort of a either motivational book or some sort of a business book, something I'm dialing in there. And then I go for about a 45-minute walk, no matter what the weather, right? So that's how I like to start my day off. It takes a while. I get up earlier than most. I'm usually up by about 5 a.m. Doing this kind of thing. And then if I've got all of that done, it just feels like I'm off to a good start for my day.
It's great advice. Okay, question number 2. This is the advice you wish you knew when you were 22. It actually comes from a song that's one of my favorite songs by a band called Mercy Me. And the title of the song is actually called Dear Younger Me, where the writer of the song is writing a letter to themselves when they've lived some life, they've had some bumps and bruises, some failures, some setbacks, and they're in this tension of, would I really want to know what I failed about, and would I want to try to avoid that, or is that really what made me? And so I often find that someone in your situation, Dave, where you've written a book, you've got these great clients that you teach, you have a lot of 20 somethings that come up to you and they say, what advice would you give me in my position now that I'm, out of college, out of university, done with high school? What would you do to get your career kickstarted in your 20s? So what's that advice you wish you knew when you were 22?
I guess it would probably be you don't need to wait for anybody's permission. Like there's nobody that's going to anoint you as being ready to go for your dreams. There's nobody that's going to give you permission. There's nobody who you need to wait to anoint you. There's nobody who you need their permission to do what you want to do. So I think a lot of us in our early years kind of suffer from that. Like we're trying to live up to our parents' expectations or things like that. So my daughter is 22. So that's a perfect example. My son is 19. So they're at this age. So again, and I'm very proud of them because they are pursuing their own paths. They're not looking to their dad for permission, or they're not looking to they once in a while look for a little bit of advice, but they're doing their own thing. And I think that's so vital, right? I really do.
Great answer. I love the framework of that. And it's actually the first time I've heard that version of that answer. As a segue to our last question, I asked one of my career coaches back on episode 5. We're now well over 160 episodes for this particular podcast. And that guy's name is Chris Oakley. Chris answered that same question, the Dear Younger Me question, with when he was in his 20s, he was part of a mentoring group. One of the exercises in the mentoring group was to read a book by an author and a speaker and a pastor named Andy Stanley. That book was called The Principle of the Path. And in the book, Andy Stanley encourages his reader to write their own obituary. And that exercise, when Chris did it, made him live on mission for the next decade. It's one of these clarifying moments that, wow, like you just have so much clarity and you know what your path is for the next 10 years. Tragically, Chris passed away 2 years ago at a young age. It was a tragic hunting accident. And that, hearing him say that in episode 5 and then learning about his passing was just such a really interesting thing in this tension for me, where we all know that we have no idea when we're going to go. We have no idea how long we have on this earth, but we all want to have a legacy. We all want to have someone speak positively about us at our funeral. And so if you had someone maybe not delivering the obituary, because that feels like a newspaper article of someone who doesn't know you, but if someone gave a eulogy, someone that was a trusted friend or family member, what would you hope they'd remember you by? What would you hope your legacy would be, Dave?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And you know what? I really think that for me, the legacy is being of service to other people, right? At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. I don't consider myself to be a deeply religious or spiritual kind of a person, but I think there is a higher power, and I think there is a higher reason for us to be here rather than make a few $1,000,000 and live like kings. I think it's about how do we help, a fellow human being on their path. And the way that I have found at this point in my career, at least, is by helping other real estate entrepreneurs create a better life for themselves and their families through real estate investing. So if I can do that, that's what it's all about.
Dave, thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your time. We've been saying it throughout the episode. Any of the things that we shared today, if you want to read that, go to investorattractionbook.com. The Money Partner Formula. Dave Dubeau, this has been a fantastic episode. Thanks again. And for our podcast producer who booked this, Ann Russell, I'd like to say thank you to her. Dave Dubeau, thanks again. And we'll see you around the neighborhood. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks very much, pal.